Hello everyone and welcome back to my Warhammer 40k guides. I am Brady and today I will be giving you part 3 of the Chaos Space Marines faction focus. In this part I will discuss the Warlord traits that the Chaos Space Marine Codex has to offer. And for those of you who don't know what the Chaos Faction Focus is, maybe because this is your first video you've seen of the series, the Faction Focus series is a series of guides I will make for armies, and right now I am covering Chaos Space Marines. Part 1 featured stratagems and spells and a quick rundown of the army, and in Part 2 I talked about the Legion traits and which legions I thought were the best for competitive play. And like I mentioned earlier, I will be discussing the Warlord traits in this video. Before we get into the main topics of this video though, this video was sponsored by themagnetbaron.com. They offer magnets of all sizes, magnetized movement trays, magnetized flight stands, and they even offer fully built magnetized models, all for a great price. So if you're looking at picking up anything magnet related for the hobby, then check out themagnetbaron.com. A link will be in the description. First, let's go over the Legion-specific Warlord traits for each Legion, and then move on to the generic Warlord traits. Like in the last video, I will be talking about these things in the order they appear in the Codex, so if you'd like to grab your own Codex and follow along, then feel free. Alpha Legion. I am Alpharius. This Warlord trait allows your Warlord to pass on the title of Warlord to another character when they die. Essentially meaning if your opponent wants to get a point for Slay the Warlord, they're going to have to kill every Alpha Legion character you have in order to get it, because each time your current Warlord dies, you will just make another character your Warlord. In addition to that ability, you can also generate one of the generic Warlord traits randomly for your Warlord, meaning you roll a d6 and consult the chart on page 164 to see the extra trait that you get. I personally play my Red Legion as Alpha Legion, and I can say that I have chosen this trait pretty much 100% of the time, unless there was something extremely specific I was going for with one of the generic traits. This trait is amazing for not giving up Slay the Warlord, and allows you to use your Warlord in battle without fear of giving up that point, as long as you have other characters. And the addition of a randomly generated Warlord trait on top of this is a really good bonus. But the main reason you take this trait is to just never give up Slay the Warlord unless your opponent kills all of your characters, which again allows you to use that character in combat without the fear of giving up Slay the Warlord. Black Legion. First amongst Traitors. This trait allows friendly Black Legion units within 6 inches of your Warlord to have their Death to the False Emperor ability trigger on a 5+. And for those of you who don't know what this is because I haven't gotten to the units yet or their abilities, Death to the False Emperor is a rule that allows a lot of units in the army to get extra attacks with the hit rolls of 6+ when targeting any Imperium units in close combat. So this trait makes the ability much more efficient since it will be on a 5+ instead of a 6+. I would only take this trait if you're using Abaddon as your Warlord because he is forced to take it, but other than that, I don't think I would ever take this trait because it's only good against Imperium armies. So unless you know you're going to be facing a bunch of Imperium armies, then I would take a generic trait instead. For example, if you take this trait and go to a tournament, there is a chance you might never face off against an Imperium army, and this trait will have been useless for the entire tournament. So again, I would only take this if you have Abaddon as your Warlord, or if you know you're going up against an Imperium army in a friendly game. Emperor's Children. Stimulated by Pain. For each wound of damage your Warlord takes, you get an extra attack to a maximum of 3. Although this sounds awesome, in reality it kind of falls short, because more often than not when your character starts taking damage, they just outright die that turn. For example, if your Demon Prince with this trait is charged by 15 Berserkers, well, that Demon Prince is probably just dead. Or if your Demon Prince gets charged by Guilliman, well again, your Demon Prince is probably just dead. Most melee units in the game are going to be able to hit your character so hard that they will kill it outright, so this trait is kinda useless. And when it comes to shooting, all of your characters are less than 10 wounds, so they can hide behind your screen, so it's really only melee that's going to get to them, unless your opponent annihilated your whole screen and can now target your Demon Prince. And if that's the case, you're probably going to lose the Demon Prince outright to some shots as well. I'm not trying to say this Warlord trait is bad, because again, in theory, it's really good, but I find it extremely situational, and things that are that situational aren't optimal and competitive. You want things that are always going to be useful, and not just useful when the stars align, quote unquote. And everything happens a certain way, because most of the time that doesn't happen. I also don't like having to rely on my Warlord taking damage in order for him to get some sort of buff. I'd rather just give him a buff so he's stronger right from the beginning of the game, instead of having to worry or try to place him in a way that he only takes a couple hits of damage but can still get extra attacks from it. And yeah, you can kind of see the point I'm trying to make. I'd rather just give him something that gives him benefits right away, rather than hoping that he only takes a couple points of damage instead of just outright dying in order to be able to make use of this trait. Iron Warriors. Cold and Bitter. All Iron Warriors units within 6 inches of your Warlord automatically pass morale tests. This is actually the best Legion trait in my opinion. You can take a bunch of 40-man cultist squads and daisy chain or conga line them to all have at least one model within the 6-inch aura, and you essentially have fearless cultists. This means your opponent can't rely on morale to kill your big blobs, meaning in order to kill a unit of 40 cultists they have to hit and wound 40 times, and you still have a 6+ save. That's a lot of shots your opponent needs to chew through these bodies, especially if you have multiple units of 40. And taking units of 40 cultists, multiples of them, gives you a ton of board control, which I have stated multiple times is the most important aspect to winning games of competitive Warhammer 40k. Think of a battalion of Iron Warriors with a Warlord with this trait, and 3 units of 40 cultists. That's 120 times your opponent has to hit and wound while you fail a 6-up save in order for your opponent to kill your screen. This most likely means your screen just isn't going to die that game unless you make a mistake and pull them out of the bubble. The best way to use this trait is with a mass of cultists who protect a bunch of your beatstick Chaos Space Marine characters, and the cultists deliver the characters into combat while also protecting them on the way there because of how the character keyword works. This style of list essentially means all your opponent can shoot and charge is fearless cultists, while the real part of your army go unharmed until they are delivered into glorious hand-to-hand combat. Again, I feel like this is one of the stronger traits in the book, and it's so strong in fact that if you're going to play Iron Warriors, I would recommend that you always take this trait and should always play the style of list that I just mentioned, because I feel it's the most optimal way to play them because they have access to this trait. You kind of don't make use of your Legion trait, but like I've already said in a previous video, that trait is basically useless anyways. This Warlord trait definitely makes up for that and is strong enough that I'd be willing to build a list around it if I was an Iron Warriors player. You also don't have to go with the Cultist route either. You can use blobs of Chaos Space Marines as well, but to be honest with the way 8th edition is, the rule set favors cheap disposable bodies much more than elite armored units. I could go way more in depth than that, but I'll save that for another video, and hope that you just take my word on it for now. Night Lords. Night Haunter's Curse. This trait allows you to basically reroll any failed roll your Warlord makes. So it could be a failed armor save, a failed charge roll, a failed hit roll, etc. This is pretty good and would probably be the trait I take for a Night Lord's Warlord if I played Night Lords. This trait gives tons of options, and like I've said before, more options wins games, so I think this would probably be the way to go if you're playing a Night Lord's army. This trait works on a melee character or a support character as well because of how many different things you can use it for. World Eaters. Slaughterborn. This Warlord trait gives your Warlord +1 attack and strength every time they kill a character, vehicle, or Titanic model. Kind of like the Emperor's Children's trait, this sounds good on paper, but in practice this trait is suboptimal in my opinion. It requires your Warlord to get the final blow on a character, vehicle, or Titanic model, which might never happen in your game. So because of this, I don't really like this Warlord trait and would only take it if I planned on using Karn the Betrayer as my Warlord, and that's only because he is forced to take this trait. Personally, I'd much rather use one of the generic Warlord traits that gives my Warlords benefits right away instead of having to meet certain conditions that may never happen. And last but not least, we have Word Bearers, the Voice of Lorgar. This trait increases aura abilities on your Warlord by 3 inches. This is an amazing trait for a support lord who wants to give reroll 1s to a gunline or even multiple melee units. It's great on really any support character, including Dark Apostles and Exalted Champions. It's actually probably the 3rd best Legion specific Warlord trait in the Codex in my opinion, and would be a decent way to build a list around. And now that I've discussed the Legion specific Warlord traits, let's get into the generic Warlord traits. Eternal Vendetta. This trait allows your Warlord to reroll all failed wounds against Adeptus Astartes models. So kind of like my explanation of the Black Legion Warlord trait, this is very situational and is only a good trait against Space Marine armies. Because of this, I would almost never take this trait unless I know I'm playing against a Space Marine army. But if I was going to a tournament, I would pick something that helps against more armies, since there's a chance you might not even face off against Space Marines at that tournament. But if you're playing a friendly game that you know is against the Space Marine army, then this probably is a good Warlord trait and might be the best option for that game. Flames of Spite. This Warlord trait allows your Warlord to do mortal wounds on wound rolls of 6+ in close combat. This is decent when combined with veterans to make it go off on a 5+ instead of a 6+ because of the +1 to wound from that stratagem. And when combined with the relic the Black Mace, which I will be talking about when I get to the relics, you can possibly do 2 mortal wounds for every wound roll of 5 or 6, which is a lot of mortal wounds. So against armies like Custodes, or an army with really good invul saves, or an army that has characters with good invul saves, then I think this Warlord trait is amazing when combined with that relic and stratagem. Other than that though, I think there are other traits that I would rather take. Unholy Fortitude. This Warlord trait gives your Warlord +1 wound and a 6-up feel no pain. This is in my opinion the best trait to put on a gunline support Chaos Lord who is only there to support your gunline, since giving him one of the other Warlord traits that are all based around close combat would be pretty useless since you aren't using him that way. So it would be better to make him more survivable from enemy spells or even snipers to keep your support lord alive longer to continue supporting your gunline. Hatred Incarnate. This Warlord trait allows your Warlord to reroll 1s to wound. This is great on a Demon Prince since they wound most infantry in the game on 2s or 3s, so rerolling 1s would be very helpful there. Or a Chaos Lord with a Power Fist because of the same reasons. I personally feel this works best on a Slaneshi Demon Prince with the Intoxicating Elixir, which is a relic I will discuss in the next section of this video. Personally, I feel like this is the best trait to take out of all the generic traits if you want to make a good beatstick Warlord. Lord of Terror. This Warlord trait gives your Warlord a 6-inch aura that affects enemy units and forces them to roll 2 dice for their morale check, and they have to pick the highest. This is best used in a Night Lord's army, but like I mentioned in a previous part of this video, relying on morale is not the best way to go because so many armies have ways to get around it. So because of this, I would still rather take a trait that actually puts out damage to kill the units I want instead of hoping they just run away. And then last we have Exalted Champion, which gives your Warlord +1 attack. This is alright and does give your Warlord a bit more punching power, but I personally would still prefer the rerolling 1s to wound trait over this one on a melee Warlord. And that about covers everything for part 3 of the Chaos Space Marine Faction Focus. Before I end this video though, I'd like to say to check me out on Patreon if you'd like to help support the channel. I offer basic coaching and list building help for my patrons of $5 or more, and also the Patreon helps me continue making these videos full time. So if you want to help support the channel and allow me to keep making content like this, then consider becoming a patron. Anyways, that's it for this video, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I was able to give you the information you were looking for, and I hope you are looking forward to part 4, which should be released later this week. So anyways, with all that said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Happy wargaming.